Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and for this episode, we're going to be looking at a movement known as Training and Power Academy. The Instagram description reads, "Discover meditation and healing courses that engage the active mind with profound results. Connect and find out how unlimited you are." Today, I will be chatting with Matthew, who has provided us with his personal insight into engaging the active mind under this academy's teachings. So without further ado, here is Matthew. Hi, Matthew, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. We're going to be talking about something that you approached me with that's new to me. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about this subject today. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure, and thanks for having me. So let's see. So I am originally from Rensselaer, Indiana. So I'm an American who's now living in Canada. And I grew up in kind of a conservative Christian environment. It was a Mennonite church, and so after I spent time, like in my childhood growing up in that environment, I even went to like a Mennonite university, well, college. I'm sort of auto translating. In Canada, we would say it was a university, but it was a college in the US. Um, and so, but in that process, I started to question a lot about what the beliefs that I was raised with, and I was seeking something else, and seeking something that was sort of outside of a faith-based sort of tradition, and something that would be a little bit more grounded in science, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And so I don't know if this is too long of an introduction of who I am.
No, this is your interview. You go how you want to.
but I yeah, just like some that's just a little bit of background, and so like I so in that process of really seeking something that was a little bit different, I met someone who is from Vancouver, Canada, and I moved here in 2003 to kind of pursue that person and that group that she introduced me to. So that's
Okay.
a little bit of where I came from.
Is that a little bit of foreshadowing there with the mention of the group that this person introduced you to?
Yes, that's a little bit of a
Right. Okay.
foreshadowing.
Interesting. So in 2003, you made a big move to a different country to kind of pursue a friendship relationship with a person who introduced you to the subject that we're going to be discussing today. And what
Yeah.
group did you become a part of?
So she introduced me to this group that was called Training and Power. It's now the name is slightly different. It's Training and Power Academy, but fundamentally not that different. And so everything that she said about it seemed to be exactly what I was looking for. It was it it seemed to be about finding answers for yourself in a way that was kind of self-empowering, so it wasn't looking to some sort of external deity to find answers, but it was
Right.
really about you know um strengthening your own relationship with your own intuition. And so I you know a lot of my background is I had become educated in and learned more about the sciences. I always found that there was this the piece missing that was like, okay, we can explain everything except why things are.
Yes,
Like we
yeah.
can explain how things are, how things work, but I wanted to like, yeah, I wanted fundamental answers, in terms of like what's the purpose of what we're doing. And so like I felt like it was something that was grounded in, at least that was my perception, that it was grounded in um something that was real rather than something that was, religious. And as and as well, I had a process, that could allow me to find some more purpose and meaning in my life.
Okay, interesting. So if I was to walk through the doors of this group today and I said, okay, pitch me a 30-second kind of synopsis of the beliefs and practices of this group, what do you think they would respond?
Well, if you were just coming in, like most groups of this nature, I mean, everything that you would hear, depending on what your background is, would be not too alarming.
Okay.
And it would be something that would probably just be not that far off from, I mean, yoga culture, really. Like, I mean, not that yoga is a part of it, but I mean, just kind of that casual spiritualism.
Okay.
That is kind of mainstream. And so it'd be like, well, this is about what you would be able to do by taking these courses is you would be able to strengthen your own intuition about yourself. You would find, you would be able to apply what you've learned to be able to heal yourself.
Okay.
And so healing is a big component to be able to like work on your own personal issues and your own personal traumas. And then by doing that, you're able to, by being more of a healed person, be able to affect and heal those relationships with people around you, so that there's this transitive thing. So the more you're healed, then you in relationship with others, like you begin to pass that healing along, essentially is how.
Yeah. And who wouldn't want to be able to do those things if you were told that you could learn how to gain those skills or hone those skills? Like, who wouldn't want to do those things? So is that how it was kind of pitched to you by this friend that you moved to Canada for?
Yeah, there was essentially that. I mean, she went into a little more detail into some concepts that you would learn in the first class, which is to start bringing into some of these metaphysical types of concepts. And essentially, one of the core belief systems that then comes across in the very first course that you would take is that everyone is essentially psychic, and that part of what you learn is not to be psychic, but basically it was always explained like it's like an atrophied muscle.
Right.
And we all have it, and we all have this intuition. And what you're able to do is by practicing it regularly, then you just strengthen that until you become more and more perceptive.
Right. Okay.
And which sounds pretty cool and fascinating. And so it's introduced very in a very subtle way initially. Mm-hmm. It using terms that you're kind of comfortable with, but basically that's the core concept, is that you're learning to be more psychic. And then they talk about terms as you go on, like they introduce a variety of other terms, like you're raising your vibration, which some of their groups talk about that as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And it was just interesting to me because when you first got in touch with the title of your email that included Training in Power, I thought it was going to be like gym culture. It sounded almost in the title like I pictured like loads of people like, using weights and stuff and trying to gain muscle and training in power. And I was thinking, this is interesting. And then the more I read your response to some of the questions I sent over, the more I was like, okay, so not anything like that at all. So no, on the outside, it's interesting.
Yeah, the name I always thought was kind of terrible, but the power that is being referred to is like your personal power. Mm-hmm. so the idea is that you're strengthening your energetic, metaphysical power. So your ability to affect yourself and your ability to affect other people is essentially increasing. And you're being literally trained how to do that. So that's, I guess, where that name comes from.
Yeah, and I could see exactly why it would be appealing to somebody that grew up with a conservative Christian upbringing, because with those types of religious households and congregations, it's often described to me by people that have left that type of church or congregation behind anyway. Obviously, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but it seems to me that you are expected to act and behave in a certain way to appease an entity or deity or something that none of us have seen or met or contacted with. And even people that claim to have had contact with this kind of powerful being, there's no way to actually say whether that is true or not. But this is kind of coming from the perspective of you, and you're focusing on yourself, and you're acting and behaving and taking part in activities for the betterment of yourself, as opposed to kind of for something or someone else that we've never seen or met. Or does that make sense?
Yeah, I think even to put a finer point on it, like Christianity, or at least the flavor of Christianity that I was raised with, was inherently disempowering, because the idea that this is what I internalized, like, I'm sure it wouldn't be, Christianity would never be presented in this way, but the idea is you're inherently kind of a crap person. There's concepts like original sin, like you basically come into the world where you're inherently evil, and also kind of inherently helpless. And because the way that that's introduced is that, of course, you need Christ to be able to bridge you from where you are to be able to be good enough to get into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I always internalized is, I'm essentially inherently evil, bad person. I also can't do this for myself. I have to pray and ask God, to do things for me, So coming from that and trying to recover from that, and then someone saying, no, you're inherently loved, you're inherently powerful, and you can actually, be the vehicle and the instrument of, what you actually want to achieve. You don't need to ask a God for this. You have the power to do this yourself. You can actually, and you can learn to be even more effective in how you do that. So those two ideas, I mean, the idea that I was, worthy of love, and the idea that I could affect myself and my own destiny, was super appealing to me.
Absolutely.
At the time.
Yeah. I can imagine, especially because this sounds as if, if there's courses, and I'm sure we'll get into this more as we go, but it seems as if, there's kind of steps that you can take where you can see the progress. You're not going to have to wait until the afterlife to see if you did all of those things right in your lifetime that you were striving towards. With this Training in Power program, you can do things for yourself and see the results as you go, instead of kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. So that's you go. Sorry, no, you go.
Yeah, you can have an immediate effect. That's exactly right. Like, you could actually, change the thing that's most important to you, which is the life that you have right now, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And did you attend any of the courses before you made a move over to Canada?
Uh, I wanted to, so there were some courses that were available or being taught once in a while in Chicago, which was about a 2 hour drive, but then
Okay.
the course got canceled. Um, there just wasn't enough students to make it worthwhile financially. So yeah, I ended up not taking any courses until I came to Canada.
Okay, okay. And when you got there, were you expected to pay like an upfront fee or do you pay per course? Like how many courses are there and all that sort of thing?
You want to know the whole course structure?
Yeah.
Um, so it is, one of the things that I've figured out, like in doing research after the fact, basically after emerging from all of that, is it has somewhat a relatively common hierarchical course structure, which was a level based system. So you know probably the closest thing that people might be familiar with is like Scientology
Hmm.
has levels, but it's not exactly like that. But essentially, it would just go. You would take level one, level two, level three, and each one would sort of build on the previous one, and you couldn't take level two until you'd taken level one.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Obviously, these groups, large group awareness training isn't the only avenue where they have level based training, but essentially, yeah, they would. The costs were per course. It costs about uh, a few $100s, so maybe I think 400 some dollars, um, for each
Per course.
per course.
Wow, that is quite
Um,
steep still. I mean, I know that it's not kind of in the same price realms as Scientology, but that is
no,
still
they pay
that's
like
still
tens of
pricey.
thousands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not. It wasn't nothing. But it's you basically each the course would be, but there is a lot of course time, uh, per level. So there would basically be you would be meeting at someone's home
Right.
typically,
Mm-hmm.
for like 3 hours per night, and you would do that for 4 nights essentially.
Okay. Okay.
Like once a week.
Okay. And how long would that last for? Is it kind of after that first week the level is done, or does it go over a couple of
No,
weeks?
there'd be 4 weeks, once a
Right.
week. You would meet for say level one.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Sorry, I thought you meant four times a week, not 4 weeks. Right. Okay. So
four
you
weeks,
meet
yeah.
once a week for 4 weeks and it's 3 hours. So it's about 12 hours. After 12 hours of meeting time, you've completed that particular level.
You have. Now there are other between levels. There were at times other requirements, in order to get to the next level as well, that you had to complete. So there was other, I guess you could say, coursework. Um, but then once you had completed whatever was needed for that particular level, then you could take the next level. There's also sometimes a period of time, like you'd maybe need to wait a year before you took the next level.
Right. Okay. And with this extra work that's included in between the levels, are you expected to pay for any of these resources as well?
uh Sometimes, although those were typically fairly modest, depending on what was actually needed in
Right.
between each one.
Okay. Okay.
The cost did go up because more would be required after each level. Um, but initially, so for level one through three, you needed to attend meetings regularly where you got cleared, um, with whatever the focus was that particular month. Um, and so there might be like a room fee of like $10, because they were renting a space because they didn't own a building.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah.
So talk us through kind of how your transition happens. You've made this move over to Canada. What is that like? That must be like, I know you've mentioned that you have someone over in Canada, so you're not completely alone when you make this move. You do have kind of somebody to help you with the transition. And then when do you go to your first group? How many people are there? What's your first impressions?
Yeah, so I didn't know any other than one person here, and so that was incredibly isolating. And um I and there in so many ways I was ripe for a group like this because I was isolated from friends and family. I mean, if you go through like Steve Hassan's bite model, like that's one of the core things, that sometimes isolation is encouraged, but in my case it was just a fact of my circumstance that I was already isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of going to the first class, I think, or meeting other people, it didn't happen for a while. It didn't happen, I think, until after I had taken level 1. So I met maybe a few people, and then I signed up through level 1, maybe through the website. I can't remember exactly how I signed up for the first course, and then met in someone's home, and then there was 3 other students essentially.
Okay. And
And the
how were these
instructor.
students? Were they kind of approachable? Were they all kind of from the similar situations as you were, or were they different?
Well, I think that the the common thread, I think, was that they were all kind of open to this idea of the metaphysical.
Right.
I think it had to be something that you had to be at least be willing to entertain, otherwise you wouldn't really last in the course. And they make a comment of in the initial course, in the initial class for level 1, to basically leave your belief systems at the door. So they encourage you to 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 put off whatever you would assume or think about whether any of this is real.
Right. Yeah.
And so I didn't get to know a lot. Those I mean, you sort of like you interact in class and stuff like that, but it's a formal setting.
Okay.
And so I didn't get a lot of chance to talk to people. And then in between each class, we would meet with other students to do what were called healings, on each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be some chance to get to know a little bit other people in the class. But I didn't really get to know people well until after I took level 1.
Right. Okay. And do you think it's kind of designed like that on purpose?
To not get to know people.
Yeah, because obviously, with a lot of groups, there's the love bombing aspect that comes into play quite early on to get people involved, engaged, and coming back. But it almost sounds like this one is almost keeping people at arm's length until you've completed level 1, and then your aim is to move further into the course and and build on those relationships a little bit more once the group realizes who potentially is going to continue to attend higher levels.
I would say one of the things I've vacillated on is like how consciously nefarious is any of this? Like, and I think for the most part that everyone had the best intentions. And I think partly the way that that's set up is, as I got further in the levels and basically trained to teach courses, part of what you're told is to be really gentle and cautious with people, and you treat students who are coming into a class as fragile.
Right.
And so I think I think just out of that, the nature of that means that you kind of keep people protected and you try not to expose them to too much because you care about them.
So you've gone to your level one, you're getting more involved in the group. Does each level have a different title or theme, and who teaches the material?
So originally all of the classes were taught by the founder, and her name is Faye Fitzgerald.
Right.
And so she originally taught and designed and taught the original courses, starting with level one, of course. And then she would just kind of gradually add more courses over time. Eventually, when she added level 6, part of that post level 6 curriculum, like those things that you would do in between other courses, was to learn to teach, or to be taught to teach, essentially. So that had been in place for some time. So most of the level 1 teachers were other former students, essentially.
Right. Okay.
So at a certain point, she rarely taught level 1 anymore. And all former students were the ones teaching level 1. And that was generally true for level 2 as well, that was not taught by her anymore. But around level 3 and up, then she was teaching most of those courses. And by 6 and up, she was teaching all of those courses.
Right. Okay. And to become a teacher, is that something that you are encouraged, that every member is sort of encouraged to strive for?
Well, I would say not only encourage, but by the time you get level 6, you're starting to be shamed for it, if you're not doing it.
Right. Okay.
So when you reach a certain level of indoctrination, then it's like Faye will talk about it in terms of, like it's like you've been given this gift. Are you going to hoard this knowledge and keep it from other people? Like, are you going to be involved in healing the world, essentially, by essentially continuing to teach and share that knowledge out to other people? So she would describe it as hoarding knowledge, and she would she would really she would shame people who had basically taken a position of where they wouldn't teach. So there was a built-in expectation that at a certain point of continuing your training, that you would teach at some point.
Right. Okay. And this Faye Fitzgerald, what credentials does she have? What is her background? How old or new is this group that she has created? Has it been around for a while, or is it quite new?
In terms of credentials, as far as I'm aware, she doesn't have any.
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure how you can be credentialed in metaphysical training, but certainly she delved into other areas where she clearly had no credentials, such as like counseling. But so she made various claims about her background at different points, and so I don't know which parts of those are accurate. It's hard to say, but she started the group, I guess, in the mid 80s.
Okay.
So it's been around for some time at this point.
Okay. And how many members do you think the group has overall, if you were to take an estimate?
It's probably, it's vacillated in the number of active members, but it's always stayed, like in the few hundred range.
Okay.
Of number of members.
And does the majority of activity take place over in Canada? I know you mentioned some courses over, or some kind of introductory meetings over in America as well?
Yeah, so it's started in Vancouver. It's mostly located in Vancouver in terms of where people are continuing to teach, but there, people would sometimes get introduced to the group and come in to train. And then if they trained up through level 6, then they would go out to back to their own places of origin and start teaching from there. And so they would sometimes grow other communities. So when I was
interesting,
when I joined, then there was communities in Seattle and Las Vegas, and some other cities in Canada as well. And just before I joined, there was I think a big community in Germany, actually, because there were some people that came over to train from Germany. But essentially that community collapsed I think just before I joined, or around the time when I was in it.
And are these people kind of feeding any of their financial income back to Faye Fitzgerald herself, going off and teaching her material?
Yes, quite a lot. I mean,
it sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme when you put it that way. When you say that she's training people who then go off to deliver the same training, so that those people can go off and deliver that training, and the money's kind of filtering all the way back to the leader. I'm definitely drawing some parallels.
Yes, but it's all very philanthropic, and where people are there. I mean, I say that sarcastically. People are there to heal the world. But yeah, she would. When you taught, I can't remember the pricing structure, but I know that if you had only 2 students, I don't think you would make any money. I think you had to have more than that. There's a certain amount that would get kicked back. And I think after that, 50% of what you would make would go back to the organization. But because I never taught and I never dealt directly with those pricing structures, I can't say that for sure, but I know that at least half, I'm pretty sure, of what you would make in those courses would go back to the organization, and would go up to Faye eventually.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And it's interesting that she has written all of this material for these courses. So if we're looking if we're taking the same numbers for each, then 12 hours per course roughly for 6 courses is 72 hours of content. And I can tell you from writing podcast scripts that 8 pages on a Word document at kind of a size 12 font is only 30 minutes of talking non-stop. So how does somebody with no kind of qualification or kind of official, how does somebody write all of this? Yeah.
So there's a couple reasons why she was able to do that. One is she's a very smart person, and would consume a lot of written material, reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the concepts, she's not inventing the concepts whole cloth, in terms of the content for each course. In fact, people had said, they took other courses from other organizations, which I won't mention because they're highly litigious. But and some of that, meditations that were delivered in the course, because each class would have at least one meditation per class. So some of those people said, "Oh, I took this elsewhere, and this was almost entirely word for word from another course or another meditation somewhere else." But a lot of it is in terms of how does she write all that content? She wouldn't. I mean, a lot of it is she would take what she had read. She would probably make notes about what she was going to say, but she wasn't writing out full scripts. She's just a charismatic person who's a good talker and is able to kind of talk off the top of her head, and would just, you know, talk about it conceptually, about the concepts that she had in her head.
Right.
And so each course would sometimes be slightly different. So in terms of getting other people trained, originally what happened was there was just recordings of her, and people had to transcribe notes for all of the courses from what she had said, regardless of whether or not it made sense. but that's how the written course content was actually created. It was basically by recording her, you know, at different times, and then trying to assemble that into something that was coherent and cohesive. Not that she was incoherent, but I mean, she would go on different tangents.
You
know, that were not necessarily germane to the actual content.
Like a lot of these charismatic leaders tend to do.
Right. And so there was other people who were very talented at organizing material, who put it into an organized, transcribed form eventually that could be used as, you know, basically a script for people to use.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if it was that, or kind of you were given a list of objectives that you had to deliver as the teacher to the students, or I don't know if there was a particular name that you were given as when you were learning or in these courses.
They were just called students at that point.
Right. Yeah. So that I didn't know if it was kind of a list of objectives the teachers were given that they had to deliver to the students, and once they delivered that and the students had participated in each objective, they were then kind of, you've all graduated from level 1 kind of thing.
You know, it is a very strange delivery, because so part of what you're indoctrinated with is the idea that words have power and words have a certain vibration. And so you were expected to deliver almost word for word, you know. So if you imagine a course, it's like you personally, when you're teaching, you're not really able to go off on tangents.
Right.
You're reading page for page, word for word, hours of content.
Wow.
Including all the meditations. Now you can answer questions, you know, people like there's different points where you can pause for, you know, like, or there's different kind of work that you do that involves one-on-one that, you know, is not scripted. But when you go to the actual lecture, you're expected to deliver that lecture as is, and give, so that you give it the same energetic emphasis that you were expected, that in theory Faye would have given as well.
Right. Okay. And there was something interesting that you mentioned in one of your emails to me about how people could be in a really vulnerable emotional state in one of the courses, and the answer to getting yourself out of that position or that frame of mind would be to fix it at the next level.
Yeah, it was, you know, so this becomes more and more of an issue as you would go on in courses.
Okay.
So you're starting out, you're learning about self-love, you're learning about, okay, I'm psychic, great, you know, I can heal myself and initially heal one other person. Yeah, you're not focused on the world, you're just focused, like for the first 6 levels, you're just focused on healing yourself. But as you get into higher levels, like the information becomes more weird. 2, you're delving more and more probably into people's personal traumas. So it becomes more, you know, emotionally difficult. And then the third part of it is that the amount of things that you're supposed to be focused on and doing energetically on a daily basis becomes kind of oppressive.
Right.
You're expected to, so in each course, you're like in level 1, you learn these energetic shields that you're supposed to put on your aura.
Right.
And then you run light through your body. So you're focused on doing these things in your mind. Now, as you go on in different levels, you do those things, plus you do all of the next things. You apply the next shields and the same focuses and do these different things. And then that just continues to go up, and you're expected by the time you get to level 6 to essentially be aware and conscious of all of those things all the time. And as you get to level 6, you're also being taught that you're under this constant energetic attack all of the time, and to essentially be vigilant and aware of that this is happening. And so it becomes more and more, you become more paranoid. I mean, yep. I'm sure that people who are in it wouldn't describe it in that way. They would describe, oh, you're more vigilant, but you have to be aware and thinking about all these different focuses, doing these things, or else you're in serious trouble. Like it's described to you that basically the danger to you is increasing as you go on more levels. So as you do a level, then you're basically like, this kind of sucks. This feeling of what I have to fight against right now. And so, yeah, it was presented to you like, okay, when you get to the next level, you're going to get much better tools to be able to handle all the stuff that you're struggling with right now. Right. So that will be, so it was described that way. It was, like when I got up to like level 7, and it's described that the cure for level 7 is level 8. The cure for level 8 is level 9. Like you get more and more tools, and then and really by the time you get to level 10, then you get like a really solid foundation where you can, where a lot of this becomes a lot easier, or at least that was the way that it was.
Wow, that sounds exhausting, especially because not only do you have to pay kind of like $400 or so for each course, sometimes you have to wait up to a year to take the next course, and you're struggling with all of this stuff all of the time. It's like sometimes I listen to true crime podcasts and they're like, make sure, check the back seats in your car before you drive anywhere. Make sure that when you go to bed, all your windows in your house are closed. Make sure your doors are locked. Make sure that if you're walking around at nighttime that you keep your keys in between your fingers in case you need to attack someone. Here's a list of numbers that you need to call if you think you're being followed. And I was thinking, if you did all of those things all of the time, and you were super vigilant about who was around you and your surroundings, and you became hyper aware of everything, you would become extremely paranoid, and you would be exhausted all of the time, even in your own home. And that's kind of what I'm getting from the effect that these courses were having on the students.
Well, it was, I can only speak from my personal experience. And I'm sure for a lot of people who are still there would say, that's all fine. I can manage all of that. But this is part of where it started to unravel for me, was that, so part of what happened, I mean, I don't know if this is jumping ahead a little bit, but so what happened for me was I became a new dad, and which was great. But I essentially stopped sleeping, and probably stopped sleeping more than most I was coping dads. With that less effectively than my partner was.
Okay.
I just didn't, I'm probably, in terms of what my stress tolerance was at the time, and continues to be. I mean, it's said that each person's stress tolerance is genetically is a little bit different, but that had the effect of kicking me into a deep depression.
Right.
And so then I needed, at first, I was turning to the training that I had received, because you're supposed to be able to fix all of these things. You're supposed to be able to heal all diseases. You're supposed to be able to, address all, trauma.
Yeah.
And any other thing that's affecting you physically, you're supposed to be able to heal that. Like you get healings in every level to be able to address it. But that didn't really work. I didn't understand why, but regardless, you know, like I had to seek out external help and get like counseling.
Yeah.
And and through that process, I realized I started to, because I had such low energy and my stress tolerance was just rock bottom. So like I got to a point where I couldn't, any sort of additional stressor was kind of dangerous for me,
Right.
because of how it might drop me and, you know, my levels of depression. And so I got more and more strict with what those stressors actually were. And at a certain point, I realized, well, this isn't good, because I'm realizing that all of this vigilance that I had in the training, all of this constant focuses, was not sustainable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like like you said, like that level of paranoia about the level of attack, you know, all of those focuses that I needed to maintain throughout a day, I was just like, I can't, I actually can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that started to fall apart for me, is realizing the effect that it was having on me in terms of stress.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, but being a new parent is such a blessing, and it's such an incredible experience, but it's also not something to be taken lightly in terms of the sleep survival stage and the sleep deprivation that comes with being a new parent anyway. You know, it's already difficult to sleep when you bring a baby home, because you're listening to them breathing when they're sleeping, and they're not sleeping when you need to sleep, and all of those things that happen. So for you to have all of this excess kind of vigilant approach to outside stress and things that, you know, that you feel like you should be able to control at this point, I can't imagine how you, well, you can't balance those two things. You can control, I suppose, your own outlook on things and how you perceive things and how you react to things on some level, but a newborn baby is not something that you can do all of those things for. And it's almost as if you, for those first few months at least, cannot exist in any other shape or form than what that baby needs at that moment in time. And there's no other way around it. And unless you completely neglect that child, which obviously majority of people I speak to would never ever do, you can't do anything then get up and feed the baby when the baby cries, and get up and cuddle the baby when the baby cries, and to have all of these other things going on that you've been taught through all these levels. It must have just been very confusing to say the least.
Yeah, it was constantly overwhelming, because I mean, part of the reason why that this sort of system of training works, and part of the way that it works is that it operates on, you know, it operates on white privilege quite a lot.
Right. Okay.
Which, what I mean is, if things are going well for you, you know, like there was this constant confirmation bias, you know, in what you were being trained, that like, oh, I'm manifesting all of these good things, you know, this is going well. And so this, you would collect all this evidence that what you're being taught was true, because, you know, this was going right in your life and this is going right in your life. You know, essentially, I've manifested all of these things, you know, or I'm manifesting even more. So I must be gaining, you know, personal power, because look at what I have in my life, you know,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah.
And so when that stops applying, when not that privilege stops applying, but I mean, when things in your life start not fitting that nicely, all of a sudden it's like there's this cognitive dissonance, where you're like, okay, how is it, how can these two things be true? Like, how it, you know, I thought that with the amount of personal power that I would be able to do this. Like, so there was no like anticipation that with having a new child that I wouldn't be able to do both. It was only, as you said, like as soon as I was in that situation and not able to manage both, then I was like, how, I couldn't, it was entirely confusing about what was going on. And why I couldn't get that energy back, and why I couldn't, like push off depression in a day, which I in theory at this point thought that I was able to do. I don't know, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but
no, that's exactly that. You've basically just, I have a really difficult way of summarizing in a short way what I'm trying to say, but you've just said it there. It's impossible to do those two things at once. So it's almost as if you had to shut off all of the things that you learned in your training, because you can't shut off a newborn baby. And obviously the baby is the priority over all of the things that you've learned in your training. So yeah, I don't know, it's strange. And then if you can't apply the training to that situation, how many more things in life could happen where you can't apply that training, and therefore it's kind of null and void at that point, perhaps?
Right. That's where it's all started to unravel, because I'm like, wait, if this has no effect on my quality of life right now, if this training doesn't actually change the outcome, then is any of this true? And that's where it started to come apart for me, because I started asking these questions about like, well, wait a minute, what if this can be wrong? Like what parts of this are true? Because I had friends who would, when I would tell them about being depressed, experiencing depression, and they would be like, well, are you doing your healings? Like they would be genuinely confused as well. Like, and one of the things you're taught, unfortunately, is that absolutely this should be effective. So if you're doing all of your healing work and your energetic work, and you're still suffering from some sort of, disease, be it physical or mental, then you must be doing something wrong. You must be misusing power in some way. You must be, maybe you're doing something, maybe you're abusing power. And that's why this is happening to you. And so like, there's this total clash and self-blame. Of belief systems.
Absolutely.
So in a way, I was almost right back where I started when I left Christianity, which was, I must be evil. There must be something that I'm doing wrong.
If you've listened to a few episodes, you'll know by now that I like to include advertising and promotions in my podcast for fellow content creators of upcoming platforms. So with that being said, here is a message from today's sponsor.
What is an American? What does an American look like? If I were born in England, I'd be English. If I were born in France, I'd be French. Yet in my own country, I'm a hyphenated American. I am categorized by my ethnicity before my nationality. If you were to Google All American Beauty, it does not represent me. Yet I am a hybrid representative of everything that America is supposed to stand for. When I check a box, I do not want to represent myself as other.
America is the only country that hyphenates their citizens by ethnicity before nationality. To learn more about how you can be part of the movement, Don't Check the Box, please visit our website at hyphened.com. That's HYPHENED NATION.com to learn more about what you can do to help end a hyphenated America. Remember, you define you.
Follow the link in the episode description to find out more today. How different are these groups from each other? You know, the Christianity side of things and the training in power. How are they different from each other at the end of both experiences? It seems like they are, unfortunately, very different in principle, but very similar in emotional and spiritual abuse and outcome.
Yeah, at least the way that I experienced it, and at least the particular groups that I was in. I mean, like, I still feel like it's possible to have a lot of concepts like self-love, for example, and like in self-empowerment, without being sort of deeply indoctrinated into a particular belief system. But yeah, you're right that there was definitely these concepts of good and evil, and needing to be on the side of good, and a lot of that black and white thinking that was the same in both cases.
Especially when you spoke about the pressure of learning to become a teacher or a trainer, because that's almost going back to that sort of, I'm going to live a modest life inside and outside, I'm going to look modest, behave modestly, and adhere to scripture and commandments because of this higher power. And then also I'm going to learn how to teach and train people in these levels because it's selfish of me to keep this knowledge to myself. Like, I should be serving a higher purpose by going out and delivering this material to other people.
Right. It wasn't, was no longer, you're no longer doing it for a higher power, but I think you phrased it exactly right, which is you're doing it for a higher purpose. And you're adhering to, like, you want to be, it's introduced to you in that way that you want to be essentially being a more and more integrous person, that as you're learning, you're expected to have more and more integrity in how you are in the world and how you're interacting with other people, like, so that you're aware that you're not, like, energetically off balance. That you're maintaining sort of your sphere of influence. In other words, like, where you're not lashing out at someone, you're not making something someone else's fault, that you're taking care of your personal faults and your traumas and everything like that. And so you are expected at a certain point to be a very kind of elevated, enlightened person in the world. And I would suppose it's not that dissimilar to how you're expected to be in Christianity, except there's this hell consequence in Christianity, but it wasn't that different in the belief system and training and power, that it was, there was kind of a death and disease and attack kind of consequence if you acted incorrectly with other people. So it wasn't like a consequence in the afterlife. It was a consequence in this life, so to speak, if you were to act incorrectly.
I was going to ask about that, and if you were kind of ever threatened with consequences that would come to you if you were to leave the group as well.
Yeah, so there was, that was sort of built in the belief system over time. And as I said, it would, like, the beliefs became more and more weird as you went up in levels, and they became more sort of intense and consequential. And so that by the time you were in level 3, it was called the life and death level, and that everything you were doing was a matter of life and death.
Wow. Okay.
And so the consequences for leaving were never like external in the group, that the group would do anything. It was almost like the way that Faye would talk about it, nothing had to be done because the power she would say the power is self-policing, that essentially if you were to misuse your power anymore, then there would be a series of consequences that would happen to you.
Right. Okay.
That you would be more vulnerable to attack, and that would come in the form of disease and possibly death. But also you would drop. So you would, when you're going through levels, you were elevating in vibration. And she would say, if you misuse power, you would drop the same distance below where you had started. So you would become a worse off person than you ever were before you started the training.
Okay.
Essentially by leaving and turning against it.
Right.
That you would be, and that would go as far as the knowledge that you had gained would all be lost, because she would say that it was tied to the vibration that you were at. So if you'd fall in vibration, you would essentially forget everything that you had learned. You would forget more than what you had learned. So there was like this kind of dementia consequence.
That's scary though. She's coming at you with a lot there, you know, if you were to ever actually commit to leaving the group. Is that something that played a part when you kind of started to drift away from the group?
Yeah, because, you know, and I wrote about this, you know, one time I wrote about my experience on Medium, and it, at a certain point, I actually know what it was, you know, like there was this, it was after the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
And there was a famous broadcaster in Canada named Jian Ghomeshi. And so he was on one of the most popular radio stations in Canada, or had one of the most popular programs called Q. Essentially, it came out that he was extremely physically abusive, that he would randomly hit women. And when this came out, he wrote this statement about, you know, he was someone who was into BDSM. And so there was people that were obviously judgmental about it. And, you know, and he also described where people were, you know, basically one person had gathered a bunch of other people to basically turn against him.
Right. Okay.
But he's an exceptionally gifted communicator. So the way that he wrote this was extremely compelling at the time, you know, as someone who is a fan of his. And so at first I was like, oh, that actually makes some kind of sense, until a friend of mine was like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, and so because I had that moment where I was like, oh, I was totally duped by this. This is like typical abusive, like language of an abuser. As soon as I realized that I had heard these same types of messages before, you know, about people who had left the training, the way that Faye would talk about them, that basically they had gathered all these people against her. You know, there was one scorned lover that had, you know, because she'd fallen, when you fall so far in vibration, then you're sort of scrambling to get back to where you were. Mm-hmm. And so you grab onto other people like you're crabs in a bucket, or where you're like in a sinking, you know, you're drowning in the water and you're trying to climb onto someone else and you take them down with you.
Right.
And so she had used all the same language as well, you know, for years, to describe anyone that had any criticism of her.
Right.
That, you know, that it was essentially a conspiracy against her. It was because they had lost all their personal power. And so they were trying to take it from her, you know. And so that just flipped a switch in my head, where I was like, I've heard all this language from an abuser before. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was right in front of me. And so because I had believed what she had said up to that point, and probably partially because she was a modern feminist, like I didn't, I was blind to it. Like I hadn't ever examined it. I never looked at any of the criticism of what she had done. I never like read any of the pieces of people who said they were abused by her. But then I started to go back and to read those and realize that it resonated so much with the experience of like that I had with her, like when she had lashed out, emotionally, when she had said things that were clearly abusive.
Yeah.
But everyone looked up to her. And she would always explain it off. She was an incredibly effective communicator and would just say, look, because I'm sort of at the peak of this organization, I'm like the tip of this wedge into the consciousness that we're trying to change in the world. That means that I'm receiving the most attack. And sometimes it means that not only is it more difficult for me to, be calm and collected, but it also kind of bounces off of me and hits other people. And then it looks like it's coming from me, but it's actually not me. It's the constant attack that we're all under. So I'm actually protecting you from a lot of this by my position at the top.
Right. Yeah. So
she had a lot of this language to just twist, where that criticism was coming from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So basically she's saying, I'm abusing you for your own good. It's for your own good. Otherwise there'll be other people that will come from the outside and they'll be a lot worse than I am.
Well, she would say, I'm not abusing you. She would say, you're perceiving it as abuse because what you're seeing is the attack that's coming energetically onto me and is essentially,
wow.
I'm not sure how she would phrase it there, but she had a way to never take responsibility for any of it.
Yeah,
like she never owned up to like basically to yelling at someone out of turn or to losing her temper.
Mm-hmm.
She would just say, well, I'm human. She would always excuse it in some way. So it was constant gaslighting, in terms of her behavior, but she was someone who would lash out strongly at people.
Right.
And would seriously yell at people, but she's like, no, I wasn't yelling. You just perceiving it as yelling because that's
oh gosh, okay,
the amplified nature of the attack.
It's interesting though that you were able to draw those parallels between the person who came out saying that he was being kink shamed rather than people who were just outraged at him being physically abusive, because there's obviously a big difference between kink shaming and saying you're a physical abuser. And I immediately thought of Kevin Spacey, who I used to be such a huge fan of Kevin Spacey and his work, and then he got accused of sexually assaulting somebody and said, I'm gay, that's why I sexually assaulted this other male, and then expected everyone to just be okay with it, which I guess is quite similar in that sense that they do just sound like the words of an abuser. I've held this horrible secret in me this whole time because I was so scared about how people would perceive me and how people would see me, and that's what my actions, me being in the closet led to me, doing this horrible thing because I've been oppressing myself because I'm actually gay. And I watched him come out with this announcement and I was just thinking, like, how is that justification for your actions in any way whatsoever? Because it's not.
Yeah, I mean, there was always that misdirection, is that she would say that she was the victim of, not of the other person, but, based on her position at the top, that she took on this brunt of this energetic attack, and yeah, that she was essentially a victim of her own heroism.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned at one point that there was a level 6 conference. Is that different to a level 6 course, or is that the same thing, just different?
So the level 6 conference is the level 6 course, and it's probably one of the most interesting of the levels because it takes place over a conference, and it has, so this is similar to, I mean, from my understanding, to like in Scientology when like the truth is revealed to you.
Right.
So so over a period of days, so for one, you're sleep deprived throughout the week. You know, she encourages you to sleep very little during the week. And then on about the third or fourth day, what happens is that it's revealed to you that all of the trauma that exists in the world, and it's kind of similar to the Scientology story, but a little bit different. Okay. But essentially, all of it comes from your first life as a human being on the planet when something went horribly wrong, and basically evil came into the world, and you were this original personality, and all of everything that you've experienced in your life has been a reflection of that original trauma that you experienced in your first life here. And so this is revealed to you as the truth, by like, first the students go up and you're told to meditate on who you really are and what this original truth is. And so you deliver what you know at the beginning, and then everyone else in the room, delivers, what they remember of their first life. And so you get this collective story by the end of everything that happened. And it's considered to be more legitimate than, say, Scientology's process, where they just deliver them like in written form, like this is the truth, because it's done by students first, and it's done by everyone sort of revealing their own truth about what happened. So just to put that thought together, so like it was considered to be a more valid process than, say, Scientology, where everything was revealed to you in written form, because like everyone had revealed incrementally everything that they knew, and so it's considered to be more truthful. It's like their revealed truth of each person. The students go first, so no one's told them what to say, and so that was considered as validation that the whole story that was assembled together was correct. Of course, you go again to the conference every year, and you hear these same stories, and so the stories start to coalesce into a single story, by the time, as the years go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it is a story that is, however you slice it, it's a story that is essentially revealed to you or introduced to you that way.
And that's interesting because one of the tactics in you mentioned the bite model earlier, Stephen Hassan's bite model that we reference quite often in these episodes, that often information will be collected to be used against you at a later date. So there's no reason why in another situation somebody might not use something they've heard to extort somebody, or say, if you don't do what I ask you to, then I'm going to go and tell this person this piece of information that you've divulged to me in secret, or you this privileged information that I can just share with whoever I want, really.
Yeah, it was I wouldn't say the information was so much used there. I mean, it was supposed to be like it was this incredibly sacred time and we never talked about it. You were never supposed to talk about it outside of the time that was given for that. And I think, part of that is so that people wouldn't probably challenge what you were saying. But you definitely, in the course of taking the different courses, you did reveal quite a bit of personal information about yourself. And especially in the meetings, which I mentioned, which were in hindsight highly unethical, because what you would do is there'd be a focus of, this is what we're looking at this month, and you would share personal information about what had happened to you, and And then people at the front in higher levels would essentially address you about a different perspective to have on that. So basically acting in a counseling context, completely untrained, to address that information. So there was information shared throughout, that people do. And yeah, I mean, it's a thought that I've had in hindsight that like, there's certainly all sorts of things that people could say about me based on whatever I shared at any given point within the training.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And how does recruitment work? Was there ever a time that you brought in somebody yourself, or how does it work in terms of you being encouraged to bring people into the groups yourself?
Yeah, you're always encouraged to bring other people in, and yeah, I did recommend it to other people at times. I don't think I ever recommended it to someone who stayed around. Like maybe they took the level 1 course, and at the time that I was recommending it, I probably was in the lower levels, and a lot of what I've learned I felt had been fairly helpful for me, in terms of like, trusting myself, feeling differently in terms of my own self-love towards myself. And like, that was a revolutionary concept to me. Like the concept of self-love, like, as I said, like in the environment that I grew up, it was a foreign concept. And so I was often, after I learned that in level 1, I was excited to share about that with other people, and have other people have that same experience. Now, as I said, once you get into, level 6, level 7, then there's more of a mandate of you need to go out and find people.
Right. Okay.
Like you need to be teaching, you need to be recruiting, because you have an obligation as a person of integrity, that you're not hoarding this knowledge for yourself, and that you're actually making an effort to make the world a better place.
Wow, yeah. And that must be some real pressure as well, because not only are you thousands of dollars invested at this point after being, through these courses, but you're also years invested as well. And I did this in another episode. Yes, fallacy. That's it. That's what it's called. And I forgot what it was in another episode, but yes, the sunken cost fallacy. It must be a real thing, especially when you're thinking about taking a step back and saying, this isn't for me anymore. There must be a point where you say to yourself, but all of the time spent and all of the money spent, and here I am. So
yeah,
am I actually going to walk away?
It was 13 years for me. Wow. And, I talked to some people. There's a lot of people that recognize all of these problems, like they recognize, some of the things that are said are not true. They recognize that the behavior of Faye at the top is often abusive, but they're like, but there's so much good here that I can't let go of. I think the thing that saved me was the depression, because it became so cut and dried for me. Like it became so clear to me that I had to have strict boundaries, over what I allowed in my life, in order to be able to survive. Like, cause I didn't want to, become so suicidal that I exited. Absolutely, and so so I had to be very conscious of everything that was in my life. And so it became so clear to me at that point. I was like, oh, I can't keep this anymore. And so in terms of the sunk cost, at that point in my life, none of it mattered. I was just like, I needed to survive. Yeah. I need to make it to next week. And so whatever is not serving me, whatever is not actually sustainable right now in my life has to go. Like I gave myself permission that like I could pick up stuff later if I needed it, but that's essentially what saved me in terms of my in terms of cost is just like as I got extremely like just kind of absolute and strict with myself.
And I often find that people I speak to on this podcast who have thought about leaving for a while only finally take that leap when their survival instincts kick in and tell them that if you continue this way, you're not going to be here much longer. So you have to make this decision. And whether that's through something like abuse or depression, through self-harm, through dangers that the group imposes itself. There's a lot of different reasons why people have said it was either stay in the group and not know if I was going to be here in a few weeks or months time, or get out and then see if I can fix some things without the pressure of the and the coercion that comes with being a part of that group or movement. So thank goodness that you were able to make that decision so that we can sit here and have this conversation today, because I imagine that there are a lot of people out there who unfortunately didn't have that instinct kick in quick enough for them to be able to take that step back and be able to have that clarity at some point.
Yeah, I mean, there's people, I mean, and this is the real harm of it, is that like because of all the abuse that was happening, and because there was such a carelessness with how trauma was treated, I personally feel that that's why there's some people that lost their lives. I know of one suicide. I don't know if there was more. And I know that there's other people that probably maybe hesitated to seek medical treatment for whatever they were experiencing medically or physically.
Yeah, well, you've spent years being told that you can cure these things without the need of professional help. So
that's right. I was shocked.
After 13 years, it must be so hard to turn that switch off, or almost impossible, because your brain's been rewired by that point.
I sort of knew instinctively that I needed additional help, when I got depressed, but I didn't expect much of it. Like I expected it to be moderately effective, because you're right, that I had been taught that we were the most effective on the earth at doing what we were doing in terms of healing people, in terms of addressing trauma. And so when I talked to an actual professional and it was super effective,
yeah,
I was like, what the heck? Like I was shocked. I didn't expect that to happen. I had always been taught that, like these fields, these sciences, were just not nearly as effective. And, and I was angry about it, because I probably would have done that sooner had I known that it was an actually effective treatment. And I'm sure that that's been true for other people, either that they're not getting the treatment that they need now, or, in some cases they waited too long and it was too late.
And interestingly as well, that is also something that Scientology seems to have in common with this group, is that they don't believe in psychiatry and psychology and those things as well. So a lot of people who would benefit from those types of professional treatments don't receive them when they are within the folds of Scientology. And I just wondered, when you went for counselling, did your counsellor have anything to say about this group in particular and your affiliation with them? Did they encourage you to take a step back were they wise to the types of control methods that were being used by this group, or did they just not offer an opinion on that at all?
Well, I think an unfortunate truth is that not a lot of people in that profession have exposure to these types of groups, even though I would say that they're not that uncommon. So there wasn't, I don't know that anyone I talked to had direct experience or training with, like basically deprogramming someone out of the group or whatever that process would look like. Yeah. And I think the other thing was that for me, it was just, most of the counseling that I had initially was just keeping me alive, essentially, and was just dealing with what are sort of the feelings and stuff that's coming up right now, which I didn't identify with as being necessarily from the experience of that group.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'd probably feel differently about it now. And so I didn't start out with saying, hey, I was in this cult and I have these feelings. It was more like, these are the feelings that I have and we need to, so it was teaching me like stress tolerance and that sort of thing. And that's what was really effective, is teaching me different ways to manage my own body and my own mental health. Like those strategies. So, it's I would say it's not something that has really come up, although now I'm starting to explore it more, and probably in the next year with my therapist, then I'll probably dive deeper into like this experience and dealing with it.
Absolutely.
Kind of head on.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see what your therapist has to offer, because I know that there are therapists who are trained specifically to deal with victims and survivors of these types of groups. And then there will also be therapists who have not come into contact with anybody that's ever had an experience like this before, and would most likely be out of their depth, perhaps, if they hadn't read any professional material. I spoke to, and I mention this a lot, I spoke to Janja Lalich, Dr. Janja Lalich on the show, who is a cult expert who has written lots of material. And when I asked her what therapists could be doing to help, one of the first things she said was, well, they can read my book. So Janja Lalich, Take Back Your Life, is a great resource for any potential professionals out there who could be thinking about going into working with victims of coercive control. So one of the things I wanted to ask you before I ask you if there's anything we've missed is to just briefly tell the listeners about the group's attitude and nicknames towards those of us on the outside of the group.
Yeah. So there was definitely a sense, that you were given over time that we were told over and over that we were kind of the best of the best and kind of the elite spiritual warriors. And so it felt like you were in this special magical realm of what you were learning. And so it was common to call everyone else, we referred to them as muggles, like they did for the non-wizards in Harry Potter. Because we kind of, it wasn't meant disparagingly, similarly to how it's not necessarily meant disparagingly in the books. And we just felt like, oh, we're part of this special magical group, and going to training is kind of like going to Hogwarts, and that's kind of how we viewed it. And that everyone else that was outside of that they're fine people, but they just don't know. Mm-hmm. They don't know any better, kind of thing. And so there was that kind of superiority.
Definitely. And when I read what you'd written in your email, I thought, I wonder if Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic and that entire universe could be seen as a cult. And then I was thinking I would have to go through the Bite model and see if there were points from the books and the films that I could apply.
Well, it didn't seem to be the most safe place.
No, definitely not. No. Brilliant. So my last question to you is, what advice do you have for anybody who finds themselves in a similar situation to the one that you were in when you finally decided to seek out professional help and make those positive changes for yourself?
So advice for people who are in and seeking to get out, essentially?
Yeah. And also kind of those dealing with the negative implications of mental health and depression.
Well, I mean, for one, I would say, to trust, people who have actual qualifications, to help guide through that process. I think, like therapy is definitely beneficial to almost anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely beneficial to someone who's leaving an experience like that. So I think forming a support network, like reaching out to other people who have had that experience, similar, it's very similar process, I would think, to, leaving an abusive relationship. Finding basically things that are safe, finding people that are safe, and then getting supports, professional supports to help you to start to untangle that mind, the stuff that's in your head that maybe kept you there in the first place. Because what the last thing that you want to do is not address it at all. And that happens a lot with people who lead groups like this, is it's embarrassing, and it's hard to talk about. And so a lot of times people won't address it, and they'll be like, I'm just going to forget about it, I'm going to go on with life. But I've seen a lot of people who left and then kind of got involved in other cults.
Yep.
That, like, until you actually address those parts of you that attracted you in the first place, then it's really likely, it's just like abusive situations. There's a chance that it can repeat. Not that it's the fault of that person, but at a certain point you have to take responsibility for re-educating yourself and from learning a new paradigm, mm-hmm. a new way to look at those situations that can change your kind of intuitive responses to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if people wanted to read a little bit more about your experience, would they be able to find your article on Medium? And if so, what is the title of that article?
So they can find stuff that I've written on Medium. I think it's medium.com/@MatthewDieners. And the title of that article was, "You Always Hope That Your Cult is the Good One."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm gonna find the link that you sent over and add that to the episode description as well. So if anybody wants to go and find that, they can do so. So is there anything you think we've missed, Matthew? I know we could probably speak about this for a good few more hours.
Yeah.
But do you think there's anything specific that you wanted to add before we say goodbye today?
I think, the one thing that I thought of, in terms of someone who's not in an experience like this, and they feel like, someone who listens to a podcast like this kind of out of just fascination, which is fine. But I think that these types of groups are, and these types of belief systems are fairly common. And I think for a lot of people, who believe that they can't ever find themselves in a group like this, is just not accurate. There's nothing that you can necessarily do. Like, there's all types of people. When I was in there's all types of people in this group and many other groups. And, you know, cults are built on trust networks. And if you trust people, then you can be deceived by people, I guess is what I would have to say. And so it helps to know, like the bite model and other things to protect yourself. But I think if you ever just like kind of blanket assume, I would never end up in a group like this, then you're kind of the prime target. Like the most vulnerable type, you know, like where you're not looking at you know, how you evaluate information and that sort of thing. It's kind of a long answer to your question.
No, but it's right. And we often speak in these episodes about how there is not a particular person who can be manipulated into these groups or encouraged into these groups. It's not somebody with a lower IQ. It's not somebody who's naive or has less worldly experience. It's not any of those things. It is anybody. Of course, there will be people in particular circumstances like yourself, those people who are seeking, those people who are in big transitional periods, like moving from one country to another, who may be more susceptible into being manipulated into these types of groups. But that doesn't mean that, you know, your average Joe is any less likely to join the group. So that is something that we always try and highlight. And it's definitely a stigma that we're trying to break, the perception that people have of the quote unquote type of person that would join a group of that have kind of coercive control methods and things like that. So so thank you for mentioning that, Matthew. And thank you so much for your time today, for coming here on the show. I'm so glad to be able to listen to your story about how you went and sought professional help, and we're able to be here today to have this conversation, and you're able to, you know, do almost like what you were encouraged to do in Training in Power, which is to bring your experience to other people, to allow them to realize that they're not going through these situations alone, but that there are things that you can do for yourself to improve your well-being and your mental health, if you can take that step back and say, this is what I need for me and this is what I'm going to do. So thank you so much for coming here, giving me your time, giving us your story, and also for writing pieces as well and putting them out on the internet, because who knows how many people might have read that document and thought to themselves, that resonates with me, and that changes my whole perspective. So I really appreciate it, Matthew.
I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's a really good opportunity to, as you said, like to try and help other people that have been in a similar experience. So I appreciate you having me here.
It's absolutely been a privilege for me, Matthew. I really hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by emailing me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or find me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.